February 3, 1945. 38,000 feet above Berlin. American bomber formations stretch across the frozen sky like a steel river. But something else moves through the clouds. Something impossibly fast. Lieutenant Jack Morrison, 357th Fighter Group, flying escort in his P-51D Mustang, sees it first. A silhouette. Closing distance faster than anything he's encountered. His radio crackles, "Bandit, 9 o'clock high." Jesus Christ, he's fast. Morrison banks hard. Full throttle. His Mustang, already among the fastest fighters America has ever built, strains at maximum speed. 437 miles per hour. The German aircraft pulls ahead like Morrison standing still. What Morrison doesn't know, he's just encountered the future. A machine born from desperation, engineered from necessity, built in the dying days of the Third Reich when speed wasn't an advantage, it was survival itself. This is the story of the 10 fastest propeller-driven fighters that ruled the skies of World War II. Machines that pushed the absolute limits of piston engine technology. Aircraft where every additional mile per hour was bought with blood, sweat, and the desperate genius of engineers racing against time. This is the story of when speed decided everything. The Ghost over Berlin, in 1939, fighter aircraft were elegant machines. Canvas and wood, with top speeds barely exceeding 300 miles per hour. By 1945, everything had changed. Metal monoplanes screamed through the stratosphere at speeds approaching 500 miles per hour. The transformation took 6 years. The crucible. Total war. Speed became the currency of survival. A bomber interceptor needed speed to reach altitude before formations dropped their payloads. An escort fighter needed speed to chase down attackers. A reconnaissance aircraft needed speed to escape. And every pilot, regardless of nationality, understood one brutal truth: in a dogfight, the faster aircraft dictates the terms of engagement. 3 nations, Germany, Britain, and America, poured everything into this race. Engineers worked around the clock. Test pilots pushed prototypes to structural failure. Production lines operated through bombing raids. And gradually, impossibly, propeller-driven fighters began approaching speeds once thought impossible. What follows is the definitive ranking. 10 aircraft. All combat-proven. All documented. From the formidable to the phenomenal, these machines represent the absolute pinnacle of propeller-driven aviation. Let's begin the countdown. Number 10, WWII, Soviet Union, 407 miles per hour. The Eastern Front, 1944. Soviet factories, relocated beyond the Urals, produce a fighter that surprises everyone, including the Germans. The Yak-3 isn't the fastest. But it's light. Extraordinarily light. At just over 5,000 pounds, the Yak-3 accelerates like nothing else below 15,000 feet. German pilots learn quickly: don't dogfight a Yak-3 at low altitude. You'll lose. Soviet ace Lieutenant Colonel Ivan Kozadov, flying the Yak-3, achieved 62 confirmed kills. On February 19, 1945, he does the impossible, shoots down a German Mi-262 jet fighter in his propeller-driven Yak. Not through speed, through positioning, patience, and predatory instinct. The Yak-3 proves something crucial: speed alone doesn't win fights. But it helps. Number 9, Republic P-47D Thunderbolt, United States, 433 miles per hour. They called it the Jug. Short for Juggernaut. And for good reason. The P-47D Thunderbolt is massive. Nearly 8 tons fully loaded. More than double the weight of the Yak-3. It shouldn't be fast. But American engineers equipped it with a turbocharged Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engine producing 2,535 horsepower. The result? A fighter-bomber that could dive faster than almost anything in the sky. Pilot testimonials describe the Thunderbolt the same way: indestructible. It could absorb punishment that would tear other fighters apart. 850 caliber machine guns. Rockets. Bombs. And when enemy fighters attacked, the P-47D pilot had one option: dive. In a dive, the Thunderbolt's weight became an asset. Gravity and horsepower combined, it could outrun virtually anything. Over 15,000 P-47Ds were built. They flew more combat missions than any other American fighter. From bomber escort to ground attack, the Thunderbolt did it all. Not the fastest in level flight, but underestimated at your peril. Number 8, Focke-Wulf FW-190D-9, Dora, Germany, 440 miles per hour. The Focke-Wulf 190 radial engine variants terrorized Allied pilots from 1941 onward. But by 1944, Germany needed high-altitude performance. The solution? The Dora. The FW-190D-9 replaced the radial engine with a Junkers Jumo 213A inline engine. The change required an extended nose, giving the aircraft its distinctive long nose profile. More importantly, it transformed the FW-190 from a low-altitude brawler into a high-altitude interceptor. Luftwaffe pilots who transitioned from earlier FW-190s to the Dora reported astonishment at the performance increase. One pilot described it as finally being able to breathe at altitude. The Dora could engage American bombers at 30,000 feet and still maintain energy for dogfights on the descent. Production began August 1944. Over 700 were built before war's end. In the desperate final months, Dora pilots flew hopeless missions against overwhelming numbers. But the aircraft itself? Magnificent. A testament to German engineering even as the Reich collapsed. Number 7, Hawker Tempest Mk.V, Britain, 435 miles per hour, June 1944. London endures a new terror, V-1 flying bombs. Hitler's vengeance weapon streaks across the English Channel at 400 miles per hour. Too fast for most fighters to intercept. Enter the Hawker Tempest. Designed as an evolution of the earlier Typhoon, the Tempest Mk.V featured a thinner wing and the powerful Napier Sabre engine. It was built for speed at low altitude, exactly what was needed. RAF squadrons flying Tempests destroyed over 800 V-1 flying bombs. The tactic? Chase down the missile, match its speed, position your wing next to its wing, and tip it off course. Or, if you had ammunition, shoot it down. Either way, it required nerves of steel and an aircraft fast enough to catch a robot bomb. But the Tempest's effectiveness extended beyond V-1 interception. In air-to-air combat, it proved lethal. Pilots praised its handling, firepower, and, critically, its speed. By war's end, many British pilots considered the Tempest the finest piston-engine fighter Britain ever produced. Number 6, North American P-51D Mustang, United States, 437 miles per hour. If any aircraft won the air war over Europe, it was the P-51D Mustang. Not the fastest. Not the most heavily armed. But the most important. The Mustang's revolutionary design combined an American airframe with a British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. The result was an escort fighter with range, unprecedented range. It could accompany bomber formations all the way to Berlin and back. No other fighter could do that. At 437 miles per hour, the P-51D was fast enough to engage any German fighter. Its maneuverability was exceptional. Its visibility from the bubble canopy was unmatched. And its reliability meant American pilots trusted it completely. General Adolf Galland, commander of the Luftwaffe's fighter forces, later wrote that he knew Germany had lost the air war the day he saw Mustangs over Berlin. The Allies could now escort bombers anywhere. German industry, already crippled, had nowhere to hide. By war's end, P-51 Mustangs had destroyed nearly 5,000 enemy aircraft. But their strategic impact was even greater. They made strategic bombing viable. And strategic bombing broke Germany's ability to wage war. Number 5, Supermarine Spitfire Mk.14, Britain, 448 miles per hour. The Spitfire. Few aircraft names carry such weight. From the Battle of Britain onward, it symbolized British defiance. But by 1943, early Spitfire variants were outclassed. Germany's new fighters had superior high-altitude performance. Britain needed an answer. The Spitfire Mk.14 was that answer. Powered by a Rolls-Royce Griffon engine producing over 2,000 horsepower, double the power of early Spitfires, the Mk.14 was a different beast entirely. Faster, more powerful, capable of intercepting high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft and even early German jets. The airframe was reinforced. The tail surfaces enlarged. Everything optimized for the massive power increase. Pilots transitioning from earlier Spitfires described the Mk.14 as a revelation. The acceleration shocked German pilots accustomed to dictating engagement terms. Over 900 Mk.XIVs were built. They served with distinction until war's end, proving that the Spitfire legend wasn't nostalgia, it was evolution. Number 4, Grumman F-8F Bearcat, United States, 455 miles per hour. The Grumman F-8F Bearcat was designed for one purpose: operate from escort carriers in the Pacific. Escort carriers, small, mass-produced vessels, needed fighters that were light, powerful, and fast. Grumman delivered. The Bearcat weighed barely 7,000 pounds empty but packed a 2,100 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine. The result? Extraordinary performance. The Bearcat could reach 10,000 feet in 94 seconds. Faster than any American fighter before it. Its roll rate was phenomenal. Its handling, sublime. Test pilots called it the best handling fighter of the propeller era. But history had other plans. The Bearcat entered service February 1945. By the time Japan surrendered in August, only 24 had been deployed. None saw combat. The war ended before this magnificent aircraft could prove itself. After the war, the Bearcat became the mount of the U.S. Navy's Blue Angels. It set multiple climb records that stood for decades. But for the pilots who trained on it in 1945, it remains the great what if of American aviation. Number 3, Republic P-47M Thunderbolt, United States, 470 miles per hour. By late 1944, Germany deployed a new threat: fast, high-altitude fighters and early jets. Standard P-47DS, despite their strengths, couldn't catch them. The 56th Fighter Group, flying P-47 since 1943, demanded a faster Thunderbolt. Republic Aviation responded with the P-47M. Engineers modified the R2800 engine, improving the turbocharger and adding water injection for emergency power. Weight was reduced wherever possible. The result, a Thunderbolt capable of 470 miles per hour at altitude. Only 130 P-47MS were built. They entered service December 1944. Early examples suffered engine failures that grounded the entire fleet. But once the problems were resolved, the P-47M proved formidable. It combined the Thunderbolt's legendary toughness and heavy armament with speed that could match or exceed German fighters. Pilots of the 56th Fighter Group flew it until war's end, achieving numerous kills against both conventional fighters and German jets. The P-47M represented the ultimate evolution of the Thunderbolt concept: unstoppable force meeting irresistible speed. Number 2, Focke-Wulf TA-152H, Germany, 472 miles per hour. Returning to our opening scene. February 3, 1945. 38,000 feet above Berlin. The aircraft that left Lieutenant Morrison stunned was the TA-152H. Developed as a high-altitude interceptor, the TA-152H featured extended wings spanning nearly 48 feet, a pressurized cockpit, and a Junkers Jumo 213E engine with a two-stage supercharger. At altitude, where most fighters struggled, the TA-152H thrived. Production began November 1944. Approximately 150 were built before war's end. Few saw combat. But those that did were devastating. April 14, 1945. Oberfeldwebel Willy Reschke, flying a TA-152H, encounters 4 P-51D Mustangs at high altitude. The Mustangs, dominant at medium altitude, are sluggish in the thin air. Reschke shoots down 2, damages a third, and escapes untouched. Allied pilots who tested captured TA-152HS after the war reported astonishment. At high altitude, it outclimbed, outran, and outmaneuvered almost everything. One American test pilot wrote, "If they'd had this 2 years earlier, we'd be having a different conversation." But they didn't. The TA-152H arrived too late. Germany's infrastructure was collapsing. Fuel was scarce. Trained pilots scarcer. The best high-altitude fighter of the war flew in a conflict already decided. Number 1, North American P-51H Mustang, United States, 487 miles per hour, and now, the fastest propeller-driven fighter of World War II, the North American P-51H Mustang. The P-51H wasn't just an upgraded P-51D. It was a comprehensive redesign. Engineers stripped 1,500 pounds from the airframe through advanced construction techniques. The fuselage was redesigned. Unnecessary equipment removed. Every component optimized for weight reduction. The Packard V1650-9 engine, an American-built Rolls-Royce Merlin, included water injection for emergency power. The result, nearly 500 miles per hour in level flight. The fastest piston-engine fighter ever to see production. But speed was only part of the transformation. The weight reduction enhanced handling. The P-51H rolled faster, climbed quicker, and maneuvered more smoothly than any other Mustang variant. Pilots who flew both the P-51D and P-51H described the H model as what the Mustang always should have been. Production began February 1945. By the time Japan surrendered in August, 555 units had been delivered. Some reached the Pacific Theater. None saw combat before war's end. The P-51H represents the culmination of propeller-driven fighter design. The absolute limit of what piston engines and propellers could achieve. Had the war continued, it would have dominated the skies. Instead, it stands as a monument to engineering excellence realized too late. Reflection - 10 aircraft. From the Soviet Yak-3 at 407 miles per hour to the American P-51H at 487 miles per hour. An 80-mile-per-hour span separating the bottom from the top. But consider what that span represents. Each additional mile per hour required countless hours of testing. Wind tunnel experiments. Engine modifications. Airframe refinements. Metallurgical innovations. Every fraction of improvement was earned through relentless engineering and, often, pilot sacrifice. The engineers who designed these aircraft worked under conditions we can barely imagine. German factories operated through Allied bombing raids. British design teams worked knowing their creations would face the Luftwaffe within months. American engineers raced to outperform enemies they'd never meet. And Soviet designers rebuilt entire industries east of the Urals while the Wehrmacht pushed toward Moscow. They succeeded. Against impossible odds, they succeeded. But the tragedy of timing haunts this list. The fastest aircraft, the TA-152H, P-47M, F-8F Bearcat, P-51H, all arrived too late. Built for a war that was ending. Perfected when perfection no longer mattered. Imagine if the TA-152H had entered service in 1943 instead of 1945. Imagine if the P-51H had escorted bombers over Berlin in 1944. Would the war have ended differently? Probably not. But hundreds, perhaps thousands, of pilots might have survived. That's the cruel calculus of war. innovation arrives when it arrives. Not when it's needed. Yet these aircraft shaped the future. The technologies developed during World War II, turbocharging, fuel injection, laminar flow wings, pressurized cockpits, became standard. Post-war aviation built upon this foundation. Every modern aircraft owes something to these machines. And their legacy extends beyond technology. They represent human capability under pressure. The absolute limit of what desperation and determination can achieve. In 6 years, propeller-driven fighters transformed from 300-mile-per-hour biplanes to 487-mile-per-hour supermachines. That's not just engineering progress. That's human genius unleashed. Closing dash, remember Lieutenant Jack Morrison, chasing that unknown German fighter over Berlin on February 3, 1945? He survived the war. Returned home. And spent decades wondering what he'd encountered that day. In 1978, at a wartime aviation reunion, Morrison met Oberleutnant Kurt Steinman, the pilot of that TA-152H. They shared drinks. Compared stories. And Morrison finally got his answer. "I was flying the fastest aircraft in the Luftwaffe," Steinman told him. "You were flying the finest aircraft in the world. That day, I was faster. But you won the war." Morrison reportedly smiled. "We built something faster. The P-51H. 487 miles per hour. It just arrived too late for us to meet again." Steinman raised his glass. "Then we're both lucky men. That would have been an interesting fight." These 10 fighters represent more than speed records. They represent nations at their most desperate and innovative. They represent pilots at their bravest. And they represent engineers at their most brilliant. 80 years later, we still debate which was truly the best. And perhaps that's fitting. Because in war, best is context dependent. The right aircraft at the right time in the right hands. But fastest? That's measurable. That's definitive. The P-51H Mustang, 487 miles per hour. The ghost over Berlin finally outrun by the ghost that never fought. This is history. This is engineering. This is the story of when speed decided everything.